What's going on, everyone? Sergeant Arguer here, and today we're reacting to another Brilliant Plans when World War something video. First one we did was World War One, about Germany, and the second one was France and World War Two. Now we're doing the Soviet Union and World War Two. Yeah, should be interesting. Let's get into it.
Brilliant plans to win World War II.
Oops.
1941. German army had invaded the Soviet Union.
Rude.
The superiority of the Wehrmacht was clear. And
Hold on.
Had invaded
Why is it so Germany controlling all of Yugoslavia? That's weird.
the Soviet Union. The superiority of the Wehrmacht was clear. Encirclement followed.
Hold on. Okay. Oh my gosh, the Battle of Slominsk. I think that's what this is called. This encirclement right here. That was insane. Like over 600,000 people were like captured or sent as POWs from this. This thing is insane. Anyways.
Encirclement with more than 1 million Soviet soldiers becoming prisoners of war. The pre-war Soviet units had been decimated, and by the coming of autumn, Red Army was mostly made up of newly mobilized troops who had not had the time to receive full training. At the same time, the Germans prepared for a knockout punch directed at the Soviet capital. Their armored spearheads had moved forward, but near the gates of Moscow, they had exhausted their offensive capabilities. It seemed that the war was decided, and it will end in 1942 with the victory of the Soviet Union. Welcome to the Brilliant Plans to Win World War II. In this series, we will examine 4 brilliant plans to win World War II with cunning strategies and see why they failed. This episode is about the Soviet plan to destroy the Army Group Center during the winter of 1941. So why, despite the German successes, would the Red Army win? In autumn 1941, the Germans had calculated that the Red Army was on the brink of collapse and had taken a gamble with their attack on Moscow. However, due to logistical bottlenecks, steady stream of Red Army reinforcements, and the coming of the Russian winter,
Yeah, and the lack of freaking resources.
their drive was halted on the approaches to Moscow. Now, German Army Group Center found itself near the Soviet logistical and industrial centers, but at the end of its own supply lines. It was exhausted from months of fighting.
Yeah, like guys, you gotta look at this. The Soviet Union supply line is literally right next to the battlefield. Like the supplies are there instantly. It's so easy to get the supplies there. But with Germany, look how far away actual Germany is. It's so far away. So yeah, like look how far away. And also, I'm pretty sure like the Soviets used different types of railways, so they had to like change all the railways and stuff. It was a nightmare. It was a nightmare. Plus all of the terrible weather.
And with a front line too long to be held with existing troops.
Yeah, that
The
too.
winter equipment was still in the rare areas, being unable to pass through logistical bottlenecks. And
Oh,
remember,
no.
winter was already here. The German troops could not advance, and staying on their present position was too dangerous. So the most sensible solution seemed to pull back and reduce the length of the front and supply lines. However, the Germans lacked the means to transport back all their equipment, and a lot of heavy weapons would have to be left behind, drastically
no.
reducing their future capabilities. Even more, the men lacked winter clothing, and a prolonged exposure to the cold during the retreat could have caused large amounts of weather casualties and could have disastrous effect on the morale. 130 years ago, Napoleon had lost his fortune during the retreat from Moscow, and the German army was in danger of doing the same. But what if the Germans would stand and fight? They could overcome their lack of manpower and winter clothing by concentrating their defense in the villages, thus creating a network of strong points. In order to successfully attack, the Red Army needed heavy weapons, tactical skill, and air superiority. However, many of the guns lost in summer had still to be replaced. Most of the officers and soldiers had been recently deployed and lacked necessary skills and combat experience, and the Germans still had a firm grip of the sky. Attacking fortified positions would be suicidal with these conditions, let alone in deep snow and freezing temperatures. But the Red Army could adopt a different approach. At the start of the battle, the Soviets did not have a large numerical superiority, but as the time progressed, more and more soldiers were finishing training. The length of the front had
Yeah, one more thing. So at the very, very back of the Soviet Union, there's Japan. And that place all the way back there, Siberia, is extremely cold. So they had all these like specialized winter troops back there in Siberia. Well, what happened was they got a guarantee of non-aggression from Japan. Japan made it clear they weren't going to invade the USSR. So the Soviet Union transferred those elite winter troops or to fight against the Germans, which provided them like a huge advantage because it's the winter.
left large gaps between the German strongpoints, and the Red Army could move some units into the German rear. Meanwhile, the units would encircle and block off the German.
That's not good.
When the exploiting force would reach the vital German logistical infrastructure, it would cause large portions of the German front to be pulled back and be threatened with destruction.
That's not good.
Most of the army group center could be destroyed in this fashion, and then the Germans would not have enough troops to mount a decisive offensive in the summer of 1942. If they couldn't win the war in 1942, then they couldn't do that at all, as later the Red Army would become much stronger and the German supply situation even more serious. In the first half of December, the Soviets put their theory to the test. They counterattacked by moving their forces into the gaps between the advancing German formations. In the south, this resulted in the encirclement of several German divisions. Threatened with being cut off, the Germans fell back. They lacked the time to evacuate all of their equipment, and a lot of it had to be abandoned. The Soviet plan was working, and the Red Army seemed to have a chance to destroy Army Group Center and decide the outcome of the war. For this, the next step was crucial. The Soviets had several options. They could make a stop to resupply their armies, or they could put their forces in one place for a concentrated attack. These steps needed time, and Stalin decided that it was more important not to give the Germans an opportunity to rest and reorganize. Therefore, the attacks were to be continued without resupply, and divisions moved forward without proper ammunition or even sufficient food. In order to help the exhausted armies to advance, all armies on the central part of the Soviet-German front were ordered to attack. The Germans weren't strong everywhere, and inevitably some of the Red Army units would find a weak spot and break through. When the Germans would pull back in order to avoid encirclement, the constant pressure would not allow them to stop the retreat, meanwhile pinning down their reserves in less threatened sectors. The concentration of the German troops was the strongest on the Moscow direction. The Germans decided to pull them back on a shorter position. During the retreat, Soviet forward elements had moved behind the German lines and were now in position to cut off the only major road.
That's not good!
The Soviets chose to pass this opportunity for a bigger encirclement. They directed their forward elements towards Vyazma in order to cut off supplies for both the German
Oh, come on, that is not gonna work.
and Fourth Armies. German Fourth Army managed to finish the retreat, and the central part of the front solidified. The line was still made up of strongpoints, but there was enough of them to cover most of the roads. Larger Soviet formations were therefore unable to bypass them, and the only way forward was through German strongpoints. The prospect of Soviet attacks here was not promising. Having created a semblance of a solid line in the center, the Germans decided it was time to cling to their positions, and retreat was declared to be not an option. This strategy could work well in the sections, and retreat was
Build snowman. What in the world?
declared to be not an option. This strategy could work well in the central part of the front, where there were reserves to counter Soviet breakthroughs. But on the flanks, where German troops were sparse, implementing this strategy would probably end up with these units being easily bypassed and encircled. Soviet advance towards Vyazma continued with their forward elements crossing the Moscow-Warsaw highway. The Germans had fortified the villages surrounding the road and used the mobility provided by the highway to sever the Soviet attempts to resupply the forward units. Without them, the Soviet forces in the German rear lacked the capacity to take the key railway hub.
Oh my gosh.
In the north, the Red Army managed to find a gap in the German lines and broke into their rear areas.
Ooh.
The Germans did not pull back from their frontline positions, which weakened the supply situation of the Soviet units in the rear, but at the same time allowed them to encircle the frontline units. They could choose between destroying the German 23rd Corps or cutting off the railway, supplying parts of the German Ninth Army. They chose to go for the bigger target, but were unable to cut off the railroad due to lack of supplies and German reinforcements. Further north, the German formations
Oh my
were
gosh.
located sparsely, and they attempted to hold their positions in accordance with the Führer's orders. The Red Army advanced, encircling and destroying most of them. In Andreapol and Toropets, they managed to capture large amounts of German food and military stocks, and used them to supply their troops, pushing onwards until their units had been spread too thin to continue the advance. After the immediate danger had passed, the Germans regrouped and closed the gap, thus weakening the Soviet supply situation to the point the Soviet units in the German rear were unable
It's such a weird looking front line. Look at this. Ugh.
to pose a serious threat to German communications. South of Lake Ilmen, the German units managed to avoid destruction and establish an effective circular defense. Nevertheless, the Red Army had cut the land-based communications to 100,000 German troops. Luftwaffe was able
That's
to
a lot.
supply these units by air to keep them fighting and prevent them from surrendering. Although the Red Army had attempted some follow-up attacks in the next months, by February the strengths of the Red Army and the Wehrmacht had become even. The German central defenses proved too formidable for the Red Army to infiltrate, and on the flanks where the Soviet units had broken into the German rear, their supply was made inadequate by German strongpoints, and they were unable to seriously threaten the German lines of communications. Both sides had suffered heavily from the fighting and the elements. From the beginning of January till the coming of the spring thaw in April, the Germans had lost more than 300,000 men, a lot of them
Oh, wow.
due to the effects of the weather. The Soviets, who were on the attack and therefore more exposed to the elements, had suffered more than twice the Germans.
Whoa!
With the coming of spring, the Germans had regained their ability to maneuver. They reconnected the encircled troops with the main front line and destroyed the undersupplied Soviet formations in the rear areas, thus solidifying their defenses. During the following year, the Soviets attempted to destroy the salient several times, but their efforts did not succeed. It was only after the defeat in Stalingrad that the German troops were forced to abandon the salient. Why did the Soviet plan fail? First, the German command managed to assess the situation correctly and decided not to make a full retreat, but instead took a seemingly more risky approach to stand and fight. This did not allow to inflict heavy damage on the German forces.
Yeah, like, I don't know. I see a lot of people that say, oh, the Germans, they should have just retreated in the winter. Like, Hitler was so stupid to make them stand and fight. That was so suicidal. Like, no, you're wrong. Eastory says so.
During the retreat. Second, the Soviets thought that the Germans were about to break, and instead of choosing a less rewarding approach by encircling smaller German formations, they took a riskier.
Yeah, that was one of the problems. Stalin was very, very impatient. And luckily he actually learned to give his generals time to do stuff and listen to his generals. But yeah.
Their approach, attempting to destroy all of them in a single deep encirclement, which ultimately failed. This limited the amount of casualties they inflicted on the army group center. Third, although the roads were filled with snow and movement of troops and supplies was slowed down considerably, traveling by air was as fast as ever. German superiority here gave them the final advantage. Luftwaffe was able to interdict Soviet breakthroughs in threatened sectors, keep the encircled troops fighting through air supply missions, and thwart the Soviet attempts to deploy troops behind the German lines through airborne operations. In the next winter, history repeated itself. Germans had once again made significant gains, but when the winter came, they were stopped before their objectives. But by this time, the Soviets had learned their lessons. Instead of attempting to cut off the whole exposed force, they concentrated their assets against a small part of it. After careful preparations, they went on an offensive and cut off the German 6th Army. The Germans attempted to use the
Oh my gosh. Fall Blow was such a disaster.
forbade retreat and attempted to set up air supply. However, this time there were too many troops in the pocket, and the dominance of the air was contested. The resupply effort failed, and the German troops were forced to surrender. The winter campaign of 19...
Yeah, the thing about, like, Stalingrad... Like, a lot of people are upset about... the decision to go into Stalingrad. Like, okay, just real quick, before the video ends, I need to explain this. Like... They didn't really think Stalingrad was going to be so heavily fought. They thought it was just going to be like all the other cities, where they just, take it, and go. Like, it wasn't. The Germans never meant for it to be this humongous battle. Like, they thought it would be like taking any other city that they took in the war. And plus, they would cut the Volga River. But yeah, the reason why they didn't cut it off anywhere else is because. Oh, hi, Eclipse. That cat. It's because Stalingrad was slightly more valuable. And they thought it was going to be easy to take. And also, with the resupply thing, Goering, I think, was the one who was like, oh yeah, we could totally resupply them. That wasn't Hitler, that was Goering. And I guess it makes sense since they did that before. Oh my gosh, Goering was so dumb. He made so many mistakes. But anyways, I don't want to get into that. The video's out to end. Anyways, yeah, thank you all for watching, everyone. Ow! And goodbye. Hello everyone, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like it and subscribe to my channel. And turn on the notification bell thingy. And if you didn't, then make sure to leave a thumbs down. Oh yeah, that would be greatly appreciated. And while you're at it, go ahead and watch my other videos. They're probably just as good, and if not better than this one right now. Except for my oldest videos, don't watch those. And, subscribe to these people down here, my fellow sergeants. They're other YouTubers that I either know or I have in high regards. Yeah, even my cat agrees. So, thank you for watching, and have a great day.